By President Donald Trump. It is sort of like a State of the Union, but not really. Happy to have you here with us. I'm Rachel Maddow. I'm joined here in the studio by Nicole Wallace and Lawrence O'Donnell and Chris Hayes and Simone Sanders Townsend. Good to be with all of you. In just a few minutes, we're going to start seeing members of Congress and their guests entering the House chamber. In about a half an hour-ish, the president himself should start making his way from the White House over to the U.S. Capitol by limousine. Then we will see the whole rigmarole unfold down that center aisle at the House chamber. The senators will all arrive at the House side. They will enter along with the vice president, who, of course, is also president of the Senate. We'll see the diplomatic corps brought in, and we'll all wonder, who are all those people? I recognize some of them. The Samoa guy. Oh, yeah. Then at least some members of the Supreme Court will be there. There's always a little suspense as to who has chosen to attend from the court and who has not. Sometimes retired Justice Stephen Breyer comes along, too, like a +1, a spare. That's always exciting. Members of the military Joint Chiefs of Staff will be there as well, though President Trump just inexplicably fired the Joint Chiefs chairman, so that'll be difficult. The cabinet will then be announced, and then finally the president will make his entrance, and we will see Republicans crowd in on him on both sides of the aisle, and eventually he will wade through it all and up to the podium. One new addition this year, the president's top campaign donor is going to be present, apparently, presumably not just in his capacity as the man who financed Donald Trump's return to the presidency with by far the largest campaign donations in American history. Presumably he's also there not just in that capacity, but also in his capacity as the chainsaw-wielding austerity czar, who has been mysteriously empowered by Trump to carry out legally dubious firings of thousands of government employees and the attempted shutdown of whole government agencies. Mr. Musk has recently set his sights on Social Security, publicly calling it a Ponzi scheme, describing it as riddled with waste and fraud, essentially calling Social Security a criminal enterprise and suggesting that it is his next target. No word on whether the president's donor will join him on the dais. Maybe they'll just squeeze him in next to J.D. Vance and Mike Johnson, third seat up there. We shall see. Now, as I mentioned, this is technically not a State of the Union address, even though it looks and acts exactly like one. The speech a president gives in the first year of a presidential term is like a knockoff, off-brand State of the Union. It's just a few weeks after the president has been sworn in, so they don't call it a State of the Union. They just call it a joint address to Congress. That said, sometimes it's the most interesting one because it is a first-year thing, and that makes this first-year address to Congress, at least generally speaking, an opportunity for a new president to lay out his vision for his term. He's got the inaugural and then this. We don't know whether or not Trump will follow that sort of historical stricture or not. A senior administration official tells NBC News that the theme for tonight's address is, quote, the renewal of the American dream. That said, Donald Trump will take to the rostrum tonight, having just launched a full-scale trade war on our closest trading partners and neighboring countries, sending U.S. financial markets off a cliff and raising prices on food, cars, and all sorts of consumer goods, essentially instantly. Chris Hayes is going to have more on that in just a moment. We're going to be talking in depth about that with our colleague Stephanie Ruhle later on this hour. We're also going to be joined shortly by NBC News correspondent Jacob Soboroff, who's going to be talking with some federal workers who are among those who were just indiscriminately fired by Donald Trump as part of this slash-and-burn assault on the federal government. Jacob is going to be watching the speech tonight with these fired federal workers. He's going to be getting their response to what they hear from the president. That should be really interesting. Meanwhile, the Trump administration, in just these first 6 weeks, has also jettisoned more than 80 years of American foreign policy, specifically the part that led to the whole leader of the free world nickname. Trump takes the podium tonight, having just stopped U.S. military aid to our purported ally in Ukraine as they continue to try to fight off Russia's unprovoked invasion. Trump has ordered an end to U.S. sanctions on Russia. He has ordered U.S. Cyber Command to stand down its operations to protect us from Russia. He has told the Justice Department to stop enforcing the law against unregistered foreign agents. He has removed the Homeland Security and FBI units that counter foreign interference in U.S. politics and elections. He has even told Russia it can reopen its embassy and consulates here, and has said he is looking forward to a summit soon with Russia's dictator. The restoration of the American dream. The Democratic response to Trump's speech tonight will be delivered by Senator Alyssa Slotkin. She is a former CIA officer. She won her Senate seat in Michigan last year, even as her state also voted for Trump for president. Senator Slotkin will deliver her rebuttal to tonight's address from a town in Michigan that voted both for her for Senate and for Trump for president. Now, I got to tell you, we don't know exactly when that Democratic response will be. It'll be after Trump speaks, but exactly when? Nobody knows. And I got to give you a fair warning. Of the 6 longest State of the Union addresses in U.S. history, Donald Trump is the person who delivered 3 of them. And they tend to just get longer and longer. And yeah, so settle in. It's going to be a night. But we will be with you here for the duration. And now, Chris, over to you. I know you've been looking at the tariff situation imposed last night at midnight. What happened in the markets today, this sort of economic chasm we appear to be throwing ourselves into deliberately.
Yeah, gosh, why is sort of the question that hovers over all of this. And the thing about America is that it's a really, really big country, about 340 million. And for all of the chaos and the destruction that Rachel was just going through, the frontal attack on the democratic order that we've seen over the first 6 weeks, because the country is so big, so large, and really so affluent in relative terms, I don't think a lot of what Donald Trump has done really has impacted most of those 340 million people, at least at the personal level. That can all quickly change. Because the president just really and truly inexplicably launched a disastrous trade war on 2 of our closest neighbors, slapping 25% tariffs on imports from Canada and Mexico. Now, who knows if he will follow through long term? For now, it's quite real. The markets certainly recognize this disaster, which is why they fell by huge amounts the second day in a row. You see, Wall Street didn't actually believe Donald Trump would intentionally load a gun and just shoot the U.S. economy in the foot. But I gotta say, we all had plenty of warning. This was coming.
We're going to have 10 to 20% tariffs on foreign countries that have been ripping us off for years. We're going to put on from 50 to 200% tariffs, 150 or 200% tariff. I will impose whatever tariffs are required, 100%, 200%. 1,000%.
Okay, so you can say a lot of things about the guy. You can't say he didn't warn you. We're at 25% for now. Donald Trump promised he would bring prices down on day 1. He very clearly didn't. Instead, he just made lots of products more expensive, from whiskey to car parts. So Trump's allies have changed their messaging.
Yes, there's going to be, as the president said on the campaign trail, there may well be short-term price movements, but in the long term, it's going to be completely different.
Wait a second. Did he really run on short-term price movements? I was there. I covered the campaign. I don't think that was the slogan. Of course, our allies, I mean, literally, and I mean this in a non-metaphorical sense, our closest allies, the physical sense, right, the people we border, also our largest trading partners for the same reason, are now retaliating in this, again, inexplicable budding trade war. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum says she will hit the U.S. with retaliatory tariffs on Sunday if Trump hasn't backed down by then, which we'll see. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau already put his into place. And I don't know if you saw this earlier today, but he came out and addressed Americans in the terms we usually hear American presidents using when they talk to the subjects of a foreign dictatorship.
We don't want this. We want to work with you as a friend and ally. And we don't want to see you hurt either. But your government has chosen to do this to you.
Back at home, we're already seeing headlines like this from the Wall Street Journal. Tariff war risks sinking world into new Great Depression, International Chamber of Commerce warns. The idea being, as goes America's economy, so goes the world, and trade wars tend to kind of proliferate, emanate out, get worse. Now, I got to say, I think and certainly hope that a new Great Depression isn't that likely. The American economy is big and pretty sturdy, but a recession certainly seems plausible, not just here, but globally. Because Donald Trump has created what looks to all the world like an intentional, sustained project to tank the U.S. economy. If the Americans who have not yet seen the impacts of this destructive presidency firsthand want a preview of what is coming, they should probably listen to some of the folks who have been fired by Elon Musk and his so-called efficiency project to get a sneak peek. My colleague Simone Sanders-Townsend is standing by with a guest for whom that is a very local issue.
Thanks so much, Chris. Joining us now is Maryland Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin, whose guest tonight for the speech is one of the federal workers who was recently fired. Congressman Raskin, can you just tell us about your plan for watching this speech? Tell us about your guest. And let's just be frank, we have heard from a lot of people across the country. I've been talking to a lot of Democratic lawmakers, and I know Democrats want the story not to be them tonight. They want it to be the American people. But there are folks out there that say you all should be fighting a little harder.
Well, we're fighting hard, and a number of us have brought with us to the speech tonight people who've been fired from their jobs for no reason at all on a completely arbitrary basis. My guest is Dr. Lauren McGee, who is a juvenile cancer researcher, the leader of a unit at NIH, who was fired in the so-called Valentine's Day massacre by Elon Musk and his subordinates. And her unit has actually been involved in some pioneering medical research and has saved lives. And she just got sacked. Why? Because she was on probation. And probation sounds like something bad, but it means she actually had been promoted to a higher position to being the lead biologist on this team. But she got fired by somebody she never met, she never heard of. She has nothing but superior and excellent evaluations in all of her work. And now that medical research is going to be basically down the drain unless the college intern, the person who just got out of college in her unit, is able to take over as the lead biologist. But we're hearing that story across the federal government now. Food and drug safety inspectors at the Department of Agriculture, at the Food and Drug Administration. We're hearing it from people at the Agency for International Development, where people are literally at the point of starvation in foreign countries, and we've got millions of tons of American food sitting on the ground because of what DOGE has done. Air traffic controllers, nuclear safety inspectors, you name it. So, look, if Vladimir Putin himself had set out to disarm and disable the U.S. government, he could not have come up with a better plan than what Donald Trump and Elon Musk are doing.
I think my colleague Chris Hayes has a question for you, Congressman.
Oh, I wanted to ask, Congressman, do you worry in bringing this guest that you're going to alienate the many Americans who are pro-juvenile cancer?
Yeah, well, you know, Dr. McGee was showing me pictures with people whose lives were saved by the kind of research that she's done. Now, she happens to work on a relatively rare form of cancer, but NIH is in the forefront of multiple sclerosis and cystic fibrosis, lung cancer, colon cancer, heart disease, and I hope they're working on malignant narcissistic personality disorder, too, because we know what a danger that is to the American people.
Congressman, Maryland is home to one of the largest concentration of federal workers in the country. The federal government is also the largest employer in this country. Your governor, Wes Moore, has talked about making resources available to people who have been fired. But one of your colleagues just today introduced legislation in the House, Congresswoman McIver, to get these people their jobs back. What can you tell us about these efforts, and do you think the White House is really going to work with y'all? Because let's just be honest here. It does not seem like this is a White House who wants to do business with Democrats, even if it helps the American people.
Well, they are dismantling federal agencies like NIH, like NOAA and the National Weather Service, like the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which they have no authority to take down. These were created by Congress, and if anybody's going to take them down, Congress will. But of course, they're not bringing bills to Congress because they know they could never pass. There's no way that they would be able to get a majority in Congress to take down the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which has saved the American people $31 billion in, bank overdraft charges and in credit card late fees. They would never be able to take down NOAA with all of the critical work it does on climate change and on seafood safety and on the weather and predicting hurricanes and so on. They could never do it that way, so they're doing it according to some monarchical game plan that Elon Musk has as part of his Silicon Valley theory of how we're in a moment of regime change and we're moving from constitutional democracy to techno-monarchy. And the American people need to understand these people are serious, so we have to be out fighting them every single day in every single way to turn it around. But the good news is that with their terrible moves on the economy, with their stupid trade war, with the collapsing stock market, millions and millions of Americans are coming over to the side of democracy and freedom. And it is going to be the vast majority of us who defeat Elon Musk and Donald Trump.
Congressman Jamie Raskin, thank you very much for your time. Rachel?
Lawrence and Nicole, let me ask you guys, just responding to Congressman Raskin there, take your point, Simone, at the very beginning, saying a lot of people think you guys aren't fighting hard enough. And he instantly comes out and says, we are fighting hard. And let me give you basically our message of the night and what we're trying to get across here. But that's the tension here, is that Americans, as the congressman was saying, I think are sliding toward the Democratic anti-Trump position as the impact of what Trump's doing is becoming more widespread. At the same time, Democratic base voters just want more and more and more in terms of opposition from their elected officials.
What's so interesting is whatever image we first put up when we show that room, this is a room full of Republicans who were told today to stop meeting with their own constituents, because Trumpism is right now today more toxic than it's ever been, more toxic than it was after January 6th. They didn't stop meeting with their constituents after January 6th. More toxic than it was after the first impeachment. They didn't stop having town halls after Trump was first impeached for withholding congressionally approved military for Congress. They didn't stop meeting with their constituents at any point in the first Trump presidency. They were told today by the Republican head of the campaign arm to stop having in-person town halls because Trumpism is today more toxic than it's been in 9 years. And that's the dynamic in the room. The thing that I don't have an answer to, and I only have more questions to the questions that I ask, and here is why. You've got Republicans who are willing to... Lindsey Graham described President Zelensky as the, quote, best ally America's ever had 10 days ago. And threw him under the bus on Friday. You don't have to do anything like this. You don't have to illegally fire workers. You could get the Republican-controlled legislature to pass any law you want. You could get them to pass a law that said, Trump is 7 feet tall and weighs 180. They would do anything if they'd throw Zelensky under the bus 10 days after calling him the greatest ally we've ever had. Why are they doing it like this?
Well, Jamie Raskin answered that in a very important point when he said none of this could pass through the House of Representatives. Couldn't even get a majority vote in the House of Representatives. Never mind the Senate, where you wouldn't even get to a vote because you wouldn't get the 60 votes that would allow you to get to the actual vote. And that's why we're seeing this stuff done this way. And the pre-existing belief that the courts might tell us was actually true was that because you need legislation to do these dramatic things like get rid of the Department of Education, which has been a Republican talking point for almost as long as there's been a Department of Education. Everyone who, whether you liked the Department of Education or not, sat back comfortably knowing that won't even come to a vote in the House or the Senate. And so it was easy to talk about. Now we're on the verge of the Department of Education being closed down without a single vote unless the courts intervene in a way that Donald Trump, in the end, decides to respect, which we don't know, and says, no, you can't do that. Obviously, that requires a vote of Congress. And so the other thing we're seeing here is that the strongest evidence you could possibly ask for that Donald Trump knows that his political career as a candidate is completely over anyone who was ever considering going back to the voters again for re-election would not have done 1 week of this stuff.
Even just on the education department, I was looking at this, the latest polls today. It's the proportion of Americans who say that they do not want the Department of Education to be eliminated is well over 60%, even in the polls that are most positive to Donald Trump. And so you don't do something like that because you think there will ever be any sort of vote on your performance ever again. You do it because you don't expect the democratic process to ever come for you again.
Yeah, and I think that there's two options here, right? Which is we haven't had a lame duck inaugurated ever, really. And the last time it happened, we didn't have the, term limits. It's either that or you don't think elections are going to happen. But it's one of the two. Either way, you don't think you're going to have to answer to voters. And so a lot of what you see where you think, like, why are they doing this? This makes no sense. This doesn't help you with any constituency. This is not legible politically. Makes sense if you think of it in those terms.
It is intentional. It has been the plan. It was Project 2025 is not about making anything work better. They don't believe that government should work for the people or that it should exist in the first place. So they want to get rid of it. They want to call it the bureaucracy. They want to come after the bureaucrats. They're coming after the mailman. The people that literally work at a courthouse in Nevada, the federal courthouse that they fired today. They're coming after Americans. And frankly, I think that's how Democrats should be talking about it.
Yeah, the mailman, the meteorologist, the people who keep nuclear weapons from exploding when they're not supposed to. I mean, we could all do that at home as amateurs, right? All right, when we come back, we're going to have a look at some of the demonstrations and protests we saw all over the country today, including at many state capitals, also in D.C. tonight. Plus, Jacob Soboroff is going to be here along with fired federal workers with whom he is going to be watching the speech tonight. So we've got a lot to get to tonight. We're really glad you're here with us.
This is what democracy looks like. This is what democracy looks like.
That was the capital city of Albany, New York. Today, March 4th, part of the March 4th for Democracy demonstrations that happened all over the country. There were protests and demonstrations planned in all 50 states. This has turned out to be another one of those days of nationwide protests. Lots of the protests today were at state houses, at state capitol buildings, and also in major cities. All ahead of the president's address to Congress tonight, we saw protesters gathered today in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and in Annapolis, Maryland, and Hartford, Connecticut, and in St. Paul, Minnesota. And St. Paul, you saw there another entry in the very popular pet protest movement, Dogs Against Doge. It's only because of that movement that we don't call that fake government agency Doggy. In Raleigh, North Carolina, they had a protest picnic. People brought blankets and sat on the lawn in front of the State House, which is a nice concept. More protests in Salem, Oregon today, and in Phoenix, Arizona today. Salt Lake City, Utah, Punta Gorda, Florida saw protests today. There was a sizable, peaceful protest outside the headquarters of the Fox News Channel in Midtown Manhattan this afternoon. Our MSNBC headquarters is right near that, and I have seen my share of protests at Fox News over the years. I have never seen one this size. Today at Fox headquarters, it was a mix of people rallying against Trump and people also rallying specifically in support of Ukraine. People protested in Washington, D.C. today, including on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, and also down the street outside the office of the Office of Personnel Management, where people were rallying to, quote, evict Doge from OPM. OPM is, of course, the office in the White House that has been used by the president's top campaign donor as a sort of base of operations and proving ground for Trump's mass indiscriminate firings of government workers and his attempts to shut down by fiat whole agencies created and funded by law. Joining us now from Washington is our own Jacob Soboroff, who tonight is going to be watching the president's speech with 4 of the people who have been fired from their jobs working for the U.S. government. Jacob, this is a very interesting concept that you are pursuing tonight. Tell us about it and tell us about the folks you're going to be watching with.
Rachel, good to see you. And I'm so glad to be here in Washington, D.C., because it is the beating heart of the United States civil service. And with tens of thousands of people being fired from their jobs, unfortunately, it was not very hard to find people from all across the United States government who wanted to come here to talk to us tonight, to watch the speech with us tonight. And in fact, far more people wanted to join us than could fit into this small studio here at the MSNBC studios in Washington, D.C. I want to introduce you to them, and we'll hear a little bit from them ahead of the speech, and then we'll talk to them as well After counterclockwise from bottom right, we have Nigella Nakuna, who was fired from the U.S. Digital Service. They're all, by the way, in a remarkably good mood after having been fired from the federal government. I'm so grateful for them to be here. Alex Taylor was fired from the U.S. Geological Survey. Jesus Murillo was fired from HUD. And Catherine Steele was fired from the U.S. Forest Service. So, Catherine, why don't we just start with you? You were a recreational technician in the George Washington and Jefferson National Forest here in the D.C. area. And you were telling me about the work you were doing. You were literally going up to people, collecting fees from people that were recreating in the National Forest. You were servicing trash cans. You were dealing with maintenance issues. Quite simply, maybe first and foremost, and I'm so sorry, I should say again to all of you, for the circumstances that we're meeting in, who's going to do your important job now?
Exactly. I think we don't know, unfortunately, and I think the reality is that the Forest Service is now looking at closing recreation areas because we just don't have the staffing to provide those essential services anymore. You
told us that your performance review was incredibly positive, but when you were fired, you were told it was because of poor performance. Do you think they actually have any idea of who they're firing?
No, I don't think they have any clue who we are or the essential work that we do for people to recreate in public lands.
Nigella, let me ask you. You were a project leader and an AI senior advisor working inside the government at the U.S. Digital Service, which was the precursor to DOGE. But most recently, you were detailed to work on immigration issues. One of the things you were doing was using tech to reduce the backlog of people that were waiting within the immigration system. It's a huge problem. It's part of the reason that we heard from President Trump all the time that he wanted to institute a deportation plan because there were so many people here with their status that hadn't been decided. You wanted to share data between agencies to make this a priority. This is a priority for them, too. Why would they get rid of you?
I don't know. I think some of these indiscriminate hirings, you're seeing a little bit of the callousness and misunderstanding of the work we actually do. The automations that we put in place, we're saving, and these are really conservative estimates, $6.5 million with a small and mighty team, because I had to go find and procure the funds of $1.5 million max. And so these are returns of 300% plus. So it's really unclear why the Department of Government so-called efficiency would try and get rid of a group that is moving forward efficient practices and really seeing the savings of their work.
And you were a supporter of DOGE initially. I get the sense you aren't any longer.
I think tech implementation is a bipartisan issue, and it's a bipartisan priority to see our government work more efficiently for people. And so if that was their mission, which they touted it to be in the beginning, that's something that I was on board for. It was the mission of the United States Digital Service at the time. But so far, that has not been what they are doing. They are firing key members who have been working there for decades, and the work is really falling apart.
Jesus, let me ask you, you were a presidential management fellow. That was a organization created to bring the best, literally bring the best and the brightest into the United States federal government. It was created under Jimmy Carter in 1977. It has been a bipartisan program held up by presidents of both parties for almost 50 years now. You told me at HUD your task and duty was literally to learn how to make the federal government more efficient and effective. You were facilitating millions of dollars of grants and earmarks to literally to localities to work with local stakeholders. Who are those people going to work with now?
You know, I don't really know. And I think HUD is dealing with that effect right now where, you know, our team was already small. It was tiny. It was very lean. We were literally called the lean, mean team. It was 2 people handling 4,000 congressional inquiries. We were tasked with helping these local grantees that have no experience with federal government. And without us, a lot of people are going to have to take out additional loans, mortgages on the funds that they were supposed to be using.
You came to the government from Harvard University. I'm sure you could have got a different gig, probably a higher paying gig. I think all of you told me that. You probably could have made more money elsewhere.
Absolutely.
Will you stay in the federal government now? Or are you going to have to look outside the government?
I'm, you know, keeping all opportunities open right now, but my whole passion has been public service. That's what I love to do, and that's what we want to do, especially as PMFs. And I think right now it's a major slap in the face to be told that we're not being productive members of this society when all we want to do is serve the American public.
And let's get to our geologist here tonight. Alex Taylor, you were fired from the U.S. Geological Survey. You were telling me that one of Trump's executive orders is directed at growing the domestic critical minerals supply and industry here, which your work was directly supporting at the U.S. Geological Survey. How do you square that circle?
I really can't. I think it speaks to the fact that they weren't paying attention to who they were firing. I conducted scientific research on sourcing unconventional deposits of critical minerals in the United States, which the administration has indicated through multiple executive orders is a high priority for them.
Yes, exactly.
But now my research is left unfinished.
And what are the long-term implications for research at USGS if they're firing people like you?
I think targeting early career researchers is devastating for the agency, just because the workforce tends to skew older already, and if we lose our junior staff, the institutional knowledge is at risk of not being passed down to up-and-coming geologists and other scientists. So I don't think it's going to be good for our research capabilities.
I'm really sorry for what happened to you all, and I'm really super grateful to be able to watch the speech with you guys tonight and to talk about it with you and with our viewers afterward. Thank you. And Nicole, one of the things that I think is important to underscore here is that those four faces you just looked at, the people that were fired in the name of efficiency, each of them said they had been working to make the government more efficient in their jobs up until the day that they were fired.
I mean, Jacob, my question, because they all worked on the specific mission that DOJ is supposed to be carrying out, do they have any theories as to why DOJ wants access to everyone's personal data and information?
Any theories, guys? You guys hear Nicole's question there? Everybody is bewildered, Nicole, and I think that that's sort of the theme, is that it's hard to understand why you would fire someone collecting funds in the forest from people, somebody making the immigration system more efficient, working on critical minerals that the president said that he wanted, working at housing and urban development to get money to localities and make sure the money is spent efficiently and effectively. It's just sitting here talking to these guys, getting to know them. I don't have an answer either.
Wow. Jacob, thank you so much. We are really, really glad that you were with those folks and going to be watching to them tonight. The thing I am most interested in for the entire night of everything that's going to happen in this coverage is their reaction to what they're going to hear tonight from the president. Thank you so much. It's great to meet all of those very, very impressive folks.
Thanks, Rachel.
All right. Part of watching a speech like this entails watching the reaction from the House chamber, which is always something, right? There's always like applause and half the side applauding and the other half not, and maybe there's somebody booing. Up next, we will bring you a field guide as to what we are expecting to see from Democrats tonight. Democrats who may wish to register their disagreement with the president's remarks in the unlikely event that he says something with which they disagree. We are expecting a colorful dress. We are expecting some Elon Musk stickers.